The scream pierced the air like glass shattering against concrete, and I felt the world collapsing on itself in that instant as the shot echoed down the street. My disabled daughter clutched her side and toppled from her chair, and the smell of gunpowder lingered, while Kerren stood frozen, her hand trembling around the weapon she had claimed was never meant to fire. The neighbors rushed from porches, their voices rising in panic unison, but she just muttered, with icy detachment I did not even see. Her. Rewind just 1 week earlier, when life felt normal, if you could call our neighborhood normal. We had moved into that carefully manicured cul-de-sac with dreams of quiet afternoons and a safe place for my daughter to roll along the sidewalks, in peace, her wheelchair gliding smoothly across the pavement. The houses lined up like teeth in a grin, each lawn clipped, each driveway clean. But behind the trim hedges lurked the watchful eyes of the HOA, and no eyes were sharper than those belonging to Kerren. Kerren, the self-proclaimed guardian of the neighborhood, the president of the HOA, the woman who carried a clipboard as though it were a scepter. She never smiled. She scanned every inch of every yard, her lips pursed, as if perpetually tasting something sour. And when she saw my daughter, her eyes narrowed with something more venomous than disapproval. It was disdain. Kerren spoke often of rules, but her true obsession was power, and my daughter in her. Bright wheelchair painted with stickers of stars, and flowers became her favorite target. At first, the complaints were petty: a letter taped to my door, that our trash bin had lingered on the curb too long, a warning that the color of our shutters clashed with community guidelines, a comment at a meeting that children should play indoors to maintain the serenity of the streets. I brushed them off, but Kerren's gaze kept returning to my daughter, the girl who dared to roll down sidewalks, laughing with friends, daring to live as though she belonged. One afternoon, Kerren cornered me as I watered the front yard, her shadow long and sharp across the grass. She said, "Your daughter disrupts the flow of the neighborhood. This is not a playground for wheelchairs or voice flat." And unyielding, I laughed nervously, thinking it a cruel joke. But her stare told me otherwise. She believed it, and from then on she escalated. Kerren patrolled like a hawk. She snapped pictures of my daughter, chatting with friends. She scribbled notes. When she saw her at the mailbox, she muttered insults just loud enough for us to hear. Special treatment drains the order of the community. Her words, like poison, whispered into the air. I tried to shield my daughter with reassurances, but even a child senses when hatred festers. Then came the day that split time in two. The late summer sun sagged low, painting the sky orange. My daughter wheeled herself outside with two friends, their laughter floating across the street. They were playing a simple game, tossing a softball back and forth, their joy echoing off the houses. I watched from the porch, sipping iced tea, when Kerren stormed across the road, her footsteps heavy with fury. She shouted about noise, about disturbance, about rules, her voice sharp enough to slice the evening. Calm. I rose from my chair, but before I could intervene, she reached into her purse and drew a pistol. The world slowed. I saw my daughter freeze, her small hands gripping her wheels. Kerren barked something about teaching respect, her finger twitching. Then the blast thundered to the air. My ears rang, my chest clenched, and my daughter screamed as the bullet tore into her back. The ball rolled away across the pavement, one friend sobbing, the other shrieking for help, and neighbors spilled from their homes, their faces pale with horror. Kerren lowered the gun, her face blank, as if surprised by her own act. Then she whispered, "I did not even see her," as though those words excused the wound, the blood, the broken trust of an entire community. I knelt beside my daughter, pressing my hands against her wound, begging her to hold on. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. But my mind, already burned with a rage that no ambulance could soothe, Kerren had crossed the line from nuisance to monster. And as I cradled my child, I knew the battle had only begun, and I swore silently that this woman who was behind rules and power would never escape the truth of what she had done. The hospital lights hummed with a sterile glow as I sat by my daughter's bed, her small frame dwarfed by the machinery that beeped and hissed around her tubes, taped to her arms, bandages wrapped across her back, her eyes fluttering with exhaustion, but still shining with stubborn strength. I held her hand and whispered that everything would be all right, though my voice trembled, because I was not sure I believed it myself. Doctors spoke of recovery of long months ahead, but my thoughts kept circling back to Kerren standing with that pistol, as if it were nothing more than an accessory. The police had come that night, flashing lights, painting the neighborhood red and blue. They took Kerren's statement, and she repeated the same line. I did not even see her, the words falling flat and hollow, and yet somehow she stood unshackled, smug in her certainty that nothing would touch her. The neighbors whispered, some in shock, others in quiet defense, saying it must have been an accident, saying Kerren had not meant harm. But I knew better. Her eyes that night had carried no remorse, only irritation, that her authority had been challenged. Days turned into weeks, and still she roamed free. The HOA board rallied around her, claiming She was a victim too, claiming the children, had provoked her, claiming the community should move on. Each word they spoke tightened a knot of rage in my chest, while I watched my daughter wince at every movement, her laughter silenced, her independence stolen for the time being. Kerren, meanwhile, strutted at meetings holding court with her followers, dismissing the incident as though it were a spilled drink, instead of a gunshot. I tried to go through the proper channels. I filed reports. I called a detective assigned to the case. I begged the HOA to take action. But each door closed in my face. Kerren's influence seeped into every corner of authority. Her friends on the board spread lies that my daughter had been reckless, that I was exaggerating, that I sought attention. It was a campaign of dismissal and erasure. And the more they spoke, the more emboldened she became. One afternoon I returned home to find another letter taped to my door, written in her sharp, precise handwriting. It stated that children playing outside was a violation of community harmony. It threatened fines if disturbances continued, and at the bottom her signature, underlined twice like a crown. It was not enough that she had fired a bullet into my child. She wanted to rewrite the narrative, to place the blame on us, as though my daughter's very existence disturbed her delicate order. Neighbors divided. Some avoided my gaze, unwilling to stand against her. Others whispered support in hushed tones behind closed doors. A plate of cookies left anonymously at my doorstep. A note slipped into my mailbox saying, "Stay strong." But when the time came to speak aloud, there remained silent fear of HOA retaliation, shackling their voices. Kerren thrived on that fear. She walked her dog with her head high, waving at those who scurried away from confrontation, convinced she was untouchable. I tried reason once more, attending a board meeting with my daughter's medical records in hand, my voice steady as I demanded accountability. But Kerren sat at the center of the table, her lips curling into a smirk as she cut me off, saying, "Your drama does not concern this board. Your daughter's accident is a private matter." I felt the room tilt as the other members nodded in agreement, dismissing the blood and pain as though it were trivial. The gavel struck the table, and the meeting moved on, leaving me seething in the back row. That night I realized something important. Kerren could not be beaten by reason or law, not yet. She had wrapped herself in rules and influence, twisting them until they shielded her from consequence. If I was going to protect my daughter, if I was going to ensure justice, I would have to change the battlefield. I began documenting everything, every glare, every note, every insult, recorded discreetly on my phone. I spoke quietly with neighbors, gathering their stories, their own grievances with her tyranny. I compiled photographs of her trespassing, to snap pictures of yards, evidence of her threats scrawled in angry notes. I built a file piece by piece, a fortress of truth too solid for her to dismantle. But truth alone was not enough. It needed light. It needed an audience. So one evening, as my daughter rested, I pieced together a video. I stitched clips of Kerren's rants during meetings, her mocking words about my daughter, her declarations about order and control. I added the footage of her waving her gun recklessly in the street, taken by a quick-thinking neighbor. I let the evidence speak in her own voice and her own venom, and when I pressed upload, I knew there was no going back. The video spread faster than I imagined, first among neighbors and across town, then online, where strangers gaped in disbelief at the woman dubbed HOA. Kerren comments poured in outraged fury, called for justice. The story no longer belonged to her carefully constructed circle of influence. It belonged to everyone. And for the first time I saw the flicker of fear cross her face when she realized she was no longer in control. I closed my laptop that night, my heart pounding not with fear, but with anticipation, because Kerren had built her kingdom on intimidation and silence, and I had just set fire to the walls that protected her. The morning of the emergency board meeting dawned heavy with tension, the sky a muted gray, as though the world itself held its breath. I walked into the hall with my daughter. Beside me, her wheelchair rolling quietly over the tile floor, her back still bandaged, her face pale. But determined, the seats were already filled, neighbors crowded together, whispering their opinions, the air thick with anticipation. At the center sat Kerren, her posture rigid, her lips painted into a smile that did not reach her. She believed, as always, that this meeting would end in her favor. I carried the folder of evidence in my hands, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The board called a meeting to order, voices droning through formalities, until finally the subject shifted to community conduct. Kerren cleared her throat and began to speak, her tone honeyed and sharp. All at once she painted herself as a true victim, a misunderstood woman hounded by lies. She said, "I have been harassed. I have been slandered. I was only trying to protect our neighborhood from chaos." Her words dripping with false righteousness, but murmurs of doubt stirred among the crowd. When the chair opened the floor, I rose and placed a fold on the table, my voice steady but edged with fire. I presented the letters, her handwriting bold and unmistakable, filled with threats and accusations. I played the recordings of her insults, her disdain for my daughter, her declarations about special treatment, disrupting harmony of the room. Shifted restless energy building. Kerren's smile faltered, but she tried to interrupt, claiming fabrication, yet the evidence was undeniable, and then I pressed play on the video. The hall fell silent as her face filled the screen, her voice echoing through the speakers, her rants captured at meetings, her cruelty word for word. And finally the footage of that night, her hand on the gun, the sharp crack of the shot, neighbors screaming, my daughter collapsing. Kerren's cold mutter. I did not even see her. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. And then voices erupted, anger, disbelief, fury, the mask she had worn for years ripped away in a single moment. Kerren rose to her feet, shouting over the uproar, claiming the video was taken out of context, that she had been provoked. But no one listened. The crowd turned against her. The very people she had ruled through fear, now glaring with open contempt. The board members shifted uncomfortably, their power crumbling under the weight of public outrage. One finally spoke, saying this is not just a violation of rules, this is a crime. Police officers who had been quietly stationed in the back stepped forward, their presence deliberate and unyielding. Kerren stumbled back, her voice rising into a screech of denial. She shouted, you cannot do this. I am the president. I make the rules. But the officer's clothes and cuffs gleaming in the harsh fluorescent light. Her protest dissolved into incoherent rage as they clasped her wrists and read her rights. The neighbors watched, some recording on their phones, others whispering in disbelief, but many cheering openly. Justice had arrived, not in whispers, not in half measures, but in full view. Her empire shattered, her arrogance devoured by the very spotlight. She had once craved. My daughter gripped my hand, her eyes wide, her lips curling into a small, tired smile, and I felt the first real breath of relief since that night. In the weeks that followed, Kerren's name spread far beyond the neighborhood. The video circulated endlessly, her face plastered across headlines, her excuses mocked, her cruelty dissected. She became a symbol, not authority, but a disgrace. Lawsuits followed, investigations piled up, and the HOA stripped her of every title, every ounce of influence. The house she had once guarded like a fortress stood silent, blinds drawn, as if it too had withered under the weight of shame. For us, the road was not easy. My daughter endured therapy sessions, endless appointments, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. She refused to let Kerren's bullet define her. She laughed again, slowly at first, but stronger each day, and in her laughter I found healing. To the community began to change. Whispers of fear replaced by conversations of solidarity. Neighbors who had once cowered under Kerren's shadow now stood together, determined never to let power be misused so cruelly again. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold, my daughter and I sat on the porch. She wheeled herself forward, her hands strong against the rims of her chair. She said with a grin, she thought she could break me, but she only made me stronger. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I smiled too, because she was right. Kerren had tried to silence joy, and instead she had ignited resilience. We eventually moved away to a place without boards, without endless rules, a neighborhood where laughter was welcome and freedom was not policed. As we packed the last box, I glanced once more at the old street, distant now, yet forever etched into memory, and I whispered a promise to myself we would not be defined by cruelty, but by the strength to overcome it. Kerren had believed she was untouchable, but in the end her downfall was swift and public, her legacy nothing more than a cautionary tale. And as I closed the door on that chapter, one knew this was not only the end of her reign, but the beginning of something greater for us. Because no matter how dark the night, the truth always waits for the light. And when it comes, it burns away every shadow. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the trial began, the air thick with whispers and the shuffle of papers. My daughter sat beside me, her back straight, her eyes fierce, though her body still carried the scars of that night. She had become the center of the case, the heart of the story, and she refused to bow. Her spirit radiated strength that silenced any pity. The judge entered, the gavel cracked, and silence fell. Kerren sat across the room, her hair pulled tightly back, her jaw clenched, her eyes darting with frantic energy. She no longer looked like the ruler of the neighborhood, but like a cornered animal ready to lash out. The prosecutor began with precision, outlining the evidence piece by piece, the video, the shooting, the recordings of Kerren's threats, the testimony from neighbors who finally found their courage when shielded by the law. Each detail struck her armor like a hammer blow. Kerren shifted in her seat, muttering to her lawyer, shaking her head as though denial alone could erase the truth. When the video played on the giant screen, the sound of the gunshot echoed through the room again, and the image of my daughter collapsing made the gallery gasp. Kerren covered her ears as if the noise itself were punishment. Her defense tried desperately to twist the story. They said the gun had misfired. They said she had poor eyesight. They said she was frightened by the children. But every excuse fell flat when weighed against the cold, hard evidence. Her own words, I did not even see her played again and again until they became the haunting refrain of her cruelty. Each repetition eroded her credibility like waves grinding stone. Then came the moment that changed everything. My daughter was called to stand. She rolled forward slowly, her wheelchair steady, her hands calm. She looked directly at Kerren, her voice clear, unwavering. She spoke in fear. She felt when the gun was raised, a searing pain that followed the nights in the hospital the way Kerren had glared at her even before the shot. She said, you wanted me to disappear because I did not fit your perfect world, but I am still here, and I will not be silent. The words cut through the room, leaving even the judge visibly moved. Kerren tried to interrupt, shouting that she'd been misunderstood, but the judge slammed the gavel and ordered her silent. Her outburst only deepened the impression of guilt. Her mask had slipped too far to recover, and the jury watched her with narrowed eyes, no longer deceived by her performance. The trial stretched for days, but the outcome grew clearer with each hour. The mountain of evidence, the weight of testimony, the fire of my daughter's courage, all pressed against Kerren, until even she seemed to shrink in her seat. The final arguments rang like thunder. The prosecutor declaring that no position, no title, no imagined authority placed anyone above the law, and that justice must be blind, but it could not be deaf to the cries of a child. The jury left, and the wait was suffocating. Minutes stretched like hours, until finally they returned, their faces solemn. The foreman rose and delivered the verdict guilty on all counts. The words echoed in the chamber, heavy with finality. Kerren's head fell forward, her shoulders trembling, her voice broke into a wail of disbelief as the cuffs returned to her wrist. The gallery erupted, neighbors cheering, tears spilling, people embracing one another as the gavel came down, sealing her fate. As Kerren was led away, screaming her innocence to deaf ears, my daughter turned to me, her eyes shining with both exhaustion and triumph. She whispered, she cannot hurt us anymore, and I felt my chest swell with a release I had longed for since that terrible night. Weeks later, the news reported her sentence, years behind bars, stripped of every ounce of power. The HOA dissolved under lawsuits, its funds drained into settlements, our family's medical bills paid by the very system that once enabled her tyranny. And for the first time in what felt like forever, our nights were quiet, free of letters, threats, or shadows lurking across the street. We moved forward step by step, my daughter returning to school, her friends rallying around her, her laughter blossoming brighter than before. The community changed, too scarred, but awakened neighbors no longer willing to be ruled by fear. They planted flowers where once Kerren had marched with scorned children, played freely on sidewalks, their voices a chorus of resilience. On the final evening before we left that place for good, my daughter sat with me on the porch, the sky blazing in crimson and gold. She said she thought she could erase me, but she only gave me a story worth telling. I looked at her and smiled because she was right. Her strength had become the true verdict, far beyond the walls of any courtroom. And as the sun dipped behind the houses, I thought Kerren alone in her cell, the silence pressing in her power, gone, her name forever bound to shame, while my daughter sat beside me, alive, unbroken, radiant. And I knew this was the ending she deserved, stripped of the kingdom she built on cruelty, while we carried forward stronger than she could ever imagine.